Tip number 1. Read. Seriously, read. Why do you need to learn kanji? Because you want to read Japanese, right? And how do you learn how to read Japanese? Practice reading. Just by reading, not only can you learn kanji naturally, you can also learn Japanese in general and be a true man of culture in an unironical way, or ironical way depending on your choice of research material. Yet, so many people do anything but read. But you might say, how am I supposed to read if I don't know kanji? Well, there's plenty of resources that have furigana. Manga, for example, very often have furigana. If you read something like Isshukan Furenzu, you don't even have to try to learn tomodachi, friends, because they use the word on every single page. And remember, you don't have to understand everything if you read something in Japanese. If you come across a sentence that's too difficult, just skip it. Focus on something you can understand, and that's totally fine. It's also normal that it takes a lot of time to read in the beginning. The more you read, the faster you get, so keep going. So go ahead and read if you already know basic Japanese, but if you don't, I will teach you the kind of Japanese the real-life Japanese people today actually speak, because textbooks and apps are weird and unnatural. So click the link in the description and subscribe to my email group. By the way, this is also how native speakers learn most kanji. We just read. But there's something you can't learn just by reading, and that's writing kanji. So here's my next tip. Forget about writing off the top of your head. Because we have computers and phones, there simply aren't many situations where you have to handwrite kanji off the top of your head. For example, I think I only have to handwrite Japanese when I write my name, fill out some forms, which doesn't really happen often, and write a birthday message to my imaginary real-life friends, which I have plenty. I can actually spend months not handwriting Japanese at all. And memorizing how to write kanji takes a lot of time, and we spend years of our education just doing that. But the thing is, it has an incredibly bad return on investment. So you don't have to do that unless you really have to. There are much better ways of using your precious time. Having said that, you should still practice the correct stroke order. Every kanji has the right stroke order, and it's important to follow it to make it look right. Fortunately, it's very easy to remember the basic rules. Top to bottom, left to right, and with a box, left vertical line first, and top right bottom. If you know this, you can easily write a kanji like kame, turtle. So just spend a couple of hours learning this, and when you have to write a kanji, you can just look it up and write it with the correct stroke order. And my next tip is, learn words instead of individual kanji. A kanji typically has multiple readings. For example, you can read this one as ko, kono, su, yo, yoshimi. But don't try to memorize these readings out of context. Nobody's going to test you how many readings you know in daily conversation. Instead, just learn words. Suki, like. Kakko, style, as in fashion. Konomi, favorite. But if you read, you don't really have to think about it because you will learn these words in context. For example, in these scenes, they are saying suki in the context of confessing their feelings. Now you are prepared for the day when your waifu or husbando confesses their feelings to you with that kanji. Now, I know there are so many kanji out there, but they actually just consist of a limited number of parts, about 200. And if you recognize these parts, it will be easy to look up a kanji. But you don't have to memorize them, you just have to recognize them. For example, hanasu consists of gonben representing words, and shita, which means tongue. So words plus tongue is to speak. It actually makes sense. And this part, gonben, is called a radical. Kanji that share the same radical tend to have related meanings. For example, ronzuru, to argue, as in to debate, also has gonben words. So you can see similarities. Remembering these parts help you recognize the kanji, guess the meaning and the reading. But you don't have to go ahead and memorize everything because it can be boring. Just pay attention to the parts when you come across a new kanji, and you will start recognizing many of them. And you can actually create stories out of these parts to help you remember kanji. This is called mnemonics. For example, this kanji, shita tongue, consists of sen, thousand, and kuchi, mouth. So you can make up a story like 1,000 mouths have 1,000 tongues. And you visualize that image, which also helps. You can make up your own stories, or you can just Google kanji mnemonics and use other people's stories. It doesn't really matter as long as you remember. Another technique you can use is my simplified spaced repetition system. The thing is, we forget things surprisingly fast. How many of you guys still remember this word? Exactly. It's tomodachi, and it means friends. And how many of you guys will remember this after a week? A lot of you guys will forget it. But what if you review this word tonight before going to bed? You will review it again tomorrow, and you will review it again 3 days after. Then it's much more likely that you will remember it after a week. This is the basic idea behind the spaced repetition system. You review your information with increasing intervals. And there are apps like Anki to implement this system. But there's a couple of problems. First, it's going to be pretty time consuming if you want to do this with every word you come across. And then you will also have to use the app regularly to benefit from this system. Some of you guys can do it, but not everybody can. Of course, in the beginning you're motivated, you use the app every day, but after a couple of weeks, you use the app less and less and you just stop doing it. That's also what happens to me. So I have a different approach. Let's say you come across this word, hanno, reaction, and you want to remember it. But of course, if you just see it once, it's very likely that you will forget it. Well, you just saw that word, right? So how do you read this and what does it mean? Some of you guys have already forgotten. So when you come across a new word, repeat it in your head several times, or you can just say it out loud. Then look away, take a deep breath, empty your mind and forget the word briefly, and tell yourself that you're reading this cute romantic manga for educational purposes, and not because if you don't have any romance in real life. Then go back to the word and see if you remember. And if you don't, learn the word again and repeat the same step until you remember. Now you can continue reading. But after finishing the page, go back to the word and review it again. If you do this, you've already made multiple attempts to retrieve the information, which will definitely help you remember the word. Of course, you will still forget words, but this will significantly increase the chance of remembering them. But once in a while, you come across words that you really want to remember, or perhaps they are words that you just keep forgetting. And this is where you can use the flashcard approach that everybody seems to like. If you want to use an app, go ahead and do it. But I actually prefer regular spreadsheets because I can go through words very quickly without tapping, clicking, or swiping. I recommend writing down the entire sentence instead of just words. Context is very important. You should of course write down the reading, and if you want, the meaning. It's better to keep the number of words small, like 10 to 20 at a time. Print out the sheet and review it from time to time. You can just cover the pronunciation and see if you remember them. Very simple, but effective. If you finish remembering all of them, go to the next sheet. The worst thing you can do is spending a lot of time making spreadsheets or flashcards and never review them again. That would be a waste of time, and I'm speaking from my own experience. Back in the day, I would write down every single English word I came across. I have notebooks full of these words. And you know what? I almost never reviewed them. I completely wasted my time. The thing is, taking notes in itself can be very satisfying because it makes you feel like you're learning something when you are actually not. So don't fall into that trap. And don't compare yourself to other people. This kind of video gets a lot of comments of people flexing how fast they learned kanji. Don't pay attention to them. Some people have more time and resources, or they're just better at remembering things. But this is not a competition. As long as you learn something new today, you're making progress. I also don't believe that there's a single method that works for everybody, because people have different needs and preferences. So if you're doing something that works for you, that's good. You don't have to change what you are doing. But whatever you do, you should always be reading something. So go ahead and read if you already know basic Japanese, and if you don't, I will teach you the kind of Japanese that real-life Japanese people today actually speak, because textbooks and apps are weird and unnatural. So click the link and subscribe to my email group, Japanese with Yuta.